Okay, so welcome to this evening's conference with Le Cercle des Langues. I am Chanel and I will be taking you through this evening's topic, which is called Diversity and Inclusive Language at Work. This conference is for level B1 to B2, and just to know that we will be doing the conference for 25 minutes. And for the last 5 minutes of the conference, we will have a question and answer. So please feel free to either put your questions in the chat or on a piece of paper. This is quite a lovely topic we are discussing today because we are going to look at social diversity and inclusive language at work. And the 4 parts that we are going to look at today will be understanding what social diversity is. We will look at social diversity and implicit bias. We then are going to talk about inclusive language at work. And finally, how to create an inclusive culture. We will be looking at vocabulary that we can use when we talk about social diversity and that language, that inclusive language at work. So let's begin. Understanding social diversity. So social diversity refers to the presence of a variety of social identities, backgrounds, cultures, and perspectives within a society or specific group. It encompasses differences in race, ethnicity, gender, sexual orientation, socioeconomic status, religion, age, ability, nationality, and more. Social diversity recognizes and celebrates the uniqueness of individuals and communities, acknowledging that diversity enriches society by fostering creativity, innovation, and a broader understanding of the world. So when we talk about social diversity, we are speaking about the acknowledgement of our differences and those differences in a way that that adds a richness to us as a community. So let's look at social diversity in France. Social diversity in the workplace in France reflects the country's multicultural society and its commitment to equality and inclusion. So there are a few factors, and these factors are inclusive legal frameworks, gender diversity, ethnic diversity, inclusion initiatives, government policies, and what are some of those challenges. So overall, social diversity in the workplace in France is a complex and evolving issue, but there is a growing recognition of its importance for fostering innovation, creativity, and a positive work environment. So, when we are covering the second topic, we are going to look at social diversity and implicit bias. So, some of the vocabulary that we will see for this topic, or that it's interesting when talking about this topic, we want to talk about diversity. And diversity speaks of our differences and the richness thereof, how different we are. Inclusion. We also talk about equity or a stereotype. We talk about a prejudice, a discrimination, and we talk about privilege. More vocabulary we can talk about is microaggression, marginalization, assimilation, cultural competence, social justice, implicit bias, systemic bias, and unconscious bias. So some of these terms we will see in our future slides. So let's look at diversity and implicit bias. Social diversity refers to the presence of a variety of identities, backgrounds, and perspectives within a workplace. This diversity can encompass differences in race, ethnicity, gender, sexual orientation, age, disability status, socioeconomic background, and more. Embracing social diversity in the workplace has numerous benefits, including increased creativity, innovation, employee engagement, and better decision making. So it opens up the conversation that when people come from different backgrounds with different experiences, it allows that richness we were talking about to enter the workplace and for there to be points of view from many different areas and walks of life, which can really give a different element of or different variety of elements to the company so it can really benefit in a positive way. But when you have the contrary, you've got what is called implicit bias. And implicit bias, on the other hand, refers to attitudes or stereotypes that affect our understanding, actions, and decisions in an unconscious manner. So let's stay on the implicit bias for a moment, because when we think about the implicit bias, we are talking about something that is unconscious. So there can be certain prejudices or attitudes or feelings or stereotypes that we have unconsciously that cause us to react in a particular way or a particular manner. And that's why it is called unconscious, because it's not something you are doing with thinking. It's something you are doing without thinking. And these biases are often formed through socialization and experiences that can influence how we perceive and interact with others, even if we are not consciously aware of it. So there we've got the two parts. You've got the social diversity that is accepted, that we are open to other forms of identities, other ages, other statuses. We are used to that and we are open to it. And then we've got the implicit bias, which it's our attitude towards and certain stereotypes that we have unconsciously. So these are the two. So let's look at some scenarios of implicit bias examples, but we need to note that these are taken from ChatGPT and are not necessarily true. They are merely for demonstrational purposes. So they are generally implicit biases that exist, and they might not necessarily be true, but based over time, these are some of them. And as we said, they're not necessarily true. They are just for demonstrational purposes. For example, an implicit bias of the United States. There is an implicit bias that American workers are more focused on individual achievement. The narrative of the American dream focuses on individualism and individual success. So this is a first implicit bias. It's not something that you create consciously. It is something that is an unconscious habit or unconscious thought. Let's look at China. There's a stereotype that Chinese workers prioritize long hours and dedication to their jobs, reflecting the cultural value of hard work. If we look at Germany, there might be an implicit bias that German workers are focused on efficiency, influenced by the engineering industry's need for precision and punctuality. So with these implicit biases, we need to address them. And addressing implicit bias and fostering social diversity in the workplace is essential for creating an inclusive environment where all employees feel valued and respected. Because we also have to look at the dangers of an implicit bias. the dangers are also that if we see someone who does not fit into that implicit bias, or if we see someone who is out of the norm, we will automatically judge them, or they will not be treated fairly. And it's not good to judge someone based on this implicit bias. We need to Social diversity talks about the inclusion of everyone with their individual merits and their individual talents. And that is why we talk about social diversity. So we need to counteract the implicit bias. So some strategies for achieving this, include social diversity in the workplace, implicit bias awareness. So once we are aware of what these biases are, we can put in place a good strategy to change the thought process. Because once we are aware that something exists, we can change it. Inclusive policies and practices, and facilitating dialogue on diversity and inclusion. With the last topic, what is so important is that sometimes we are not aware of someone's background, someone's socioeconomic status. We are not aware of their story. And oftentimes, when we share these stories, it opens up a very healthy conversation to understand more about the person, their background, where they come from. And we are in this moment, we break the implicit bias. So let's look at an exercise, Dennis. We're going to answer the following questions in the chat. And because it's only you, you're more than welcome to answer it. And we've got one day as well. You can answer it in the chat, or if you'd like to say it in conversation. Do you consider that interculturality at work brings benefits to the team? So what do you think? Put your comments in the chat, or please feel free to mute your microphone. Do you think it brings benefit to the team, and why? What do you think, Dennis?
Yes, absolutely. I think that it's very important to recognize all the capacities, and the specific skills of each member of a
Yes.
team, and to know the framework of each member's life.
Yes.
And it's probably I am sure it's a very important source of creativity for the work of the community.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for sharing. Wanda, do you have anything you would like to share? No, so we are going to continue. Thank you so much, Dennis, for sharing. So let's have a look. So this is what's the most important part. So when we're talking about that, we had many suggestions of how to bring inclusion into the workplace. For example, social diversity, implicit bias awareness, inclusive policies and practice, facilitating dialogue. All of these are centered around inclusive language, because all of these parts are impacted by the way that we communicate. When we are going to create these policies or create this awareness, it will be through the way we communicate. And that is why it's important to have inclusive language at work. So let's have a look at that. Inclusive language at work refers to using language that respects and includes all individuals, regardless of their background, identity, or characteristics. So what are the key aspects of inclusive language at work? We need to avoid stereotypes. We need to be mindful of stereotypes and avoid language that reinforces them. This includes avoiding assumptions about gender, race, ethnicity, age, sexual orientation, religion, disability, or any other characteristics. So we need to be mindful of the language that we use. We also need to look at the gender neutrality. We need to use gender neutral language whenever possible. Instead of using he or she, use they, or rephrase the sentence to be gender neutral. For example, instead of saying each employee should submit his report, you can say each employee should submit their report. And that is how we have inclusivity. In English, this issue does not arise as often as in French, as we have the gender neutral option. So as you know, in French, there is the il and the elle for objects, and that is a part of the language. In English, we don't have that because both the male and female are one. For example, we say they. And often it is just an object, for example. In English, we'll say the car. En français, on dit la voiture. Et donc, mais c'est comme ça. It is like that. So oftentimes we have to navigate the complexities of not having that option in French. We also need to we can avoid using exclusive terms. For example, we avoid using language that may exclude or marginalize certain groups of people. For example, instead of using terms like guys to refer to a mixed gender group, we opt for inclusive alternatives like everyone, or team, or people, or folks. So again, we are just trying to make sure that everyone is included. We also have to have cultural sensitivity. We need to be mindful of cultural differences and avoid language that may be offensive or insensitive to certain cultural groups. This includes being respectful of religious holidays, dietary restrictions, and cultural practices. Using inclusive language at work helps create an environment where everyone feels valued. So, for example, a common expression we often hear is manpower. So, we can have an inclusive alternative, which could be workforce or human resources. We have a common expression such as chairman or chairman of the board, and we could have an inclusive alternative, which is chairperson or chair of the board. That also depends on the setting within which you are. A common expression we have is he, she, when the gender is unknown or irrelevant. It is possible to rephrase the sentence to avoid gendered pronouns. For example, the candidate will present their findings instead of he or she will present his or her findings. Obviously, if the person is okay with being called him or her, that is fine as well. It always just depends on the person, and we would like to make sure that every part or every element is respected. So whether they would prefer to be gender neutral or whether they would like to be recognized as one, both are okay and both should be respected. And that is why often, if we do not know in English, we use they or their, because it just makes everything neutral. Inclusive messaging. When communicating with colleagues or clients, we use language that is inclusive and welcoming to all. So most oftentimes we avoid using jargon or acronyms or expressions that might be unfamiliar or exclusive to certain groups. Listening and learning. We need to be open to feedback and we need to be willing to learn. So obviously what this is saying is we oftentimes could get it wrong, where we misuse a word or an expression, or because as we saw with implicit bias, it's something that we do without even thinking about it. And in those moments, I believe we take the opportunity to listen and apologize if necessary, and we learn and we move forward. So let's focus on creating an inclusive culture. What does that look like? So before analyzing this, if you were the boss of a company, how do you think you could create an inclusive culture in your work environment? Now, Juande, I know that you and Dennis, you are here. Juande, we can't speak or see. Maybe you could put it in the chat. But Dennis, if it were you, if you were a boss of a company, how do you think you could create an inclusive culture in your work environment?
maybe that a good tool would be, for example, to organize, for example, each week a short moment shared by all the members of the team
Yes.
to exchange freely some ideas and some feelings about a subject, and without any without specifying the linked of each member in this team,
Yes, absolutely.
for
So maybe
example.
just a brainstorming session or a moment to
Exactly.
share information. Beautiful. Thank you so much for sharing. So let's have a look. So let's look at some tips. When we are fostering inclusive language at it involves both individual efforts and organizational initiatives. So we recommend you to lead by example. Model inclusive language in your own communication. Be mindful of the words you use and the impact they may have on others. So that's a beautiful way. We take personal responsibility for how we communicate with others, and we make sure that we are being inclusive in what we say and how we say it. And as I have said, it is very easy to make a mistake. And if we do make that mistake, we apologize, we fix the mistake, and we move forward. Another beautiful tip is to celebrate diversity. Celebrate and acknowledge the diversity of your workforce. Recognize cultural holidays and heritage months and host diversity themed events or workshop. That could be a great idea. We could also provide training. We can advocate for diversity and inclusion training within your organization. Training sessions on inclusive language can help raise awareness and build empathy amongst team members. So, in conclusion, good communication and acknowledgement of diversity and empathy are fundamental aspects in the workplace. Thus, awareness, willingness, and receptiveness are really important factors for a satisfactory and respectful working environment and coexistence among colleagues in all senses, excuse me. So we need to be aware of the matters discussed during the conference and appreciate the people around you. So, thank you everyone for joining me for this conference this evening. I really hope that there were some good ideas to take away, as well as with the vocabulary, because obviously the vocabulary is the most important part because it's what we will use in our daily lives to speak to our team members, to speak to the people around us. Do you have any comments or questions or things you'd like to share?
Well, thank you very much, because it's a very important matter and concern
Yes.
in every firm for the management.
Yeah.
So the conference gives a lot of idea and tools to
Yes.
work on it. It was
No.
very interesting.
Thank you, Dennis, and thank you so much for joining us, Wanda and Dennis. And I will see you next week for the next conference.
Exactly. Have a
Have
good
a
evening.
beautiful weekend. Bye bye, everyone.
Bye bye.